Thank you very much to Ursula for the invitation, and it's a privilege to be here. I said I got lost and I found myself in a happy place. Climate and environment, the new instruments of injustice. And the world today is very concerned about human rights, so injustice has reduced, but this is one of the areas where it has remained. I'm a conservationist, so I talk a lot about protected areas, national parks. These are very primitive, backward tools of conservation. Because we have to ask, in a protected area, it's protected from who? By definition, this is protected from indigenous people, protected from the owners. So a protected area in Kenya is protected from Kenyans, or a protected area in Tanzania protected from Tanzanians. And this is fundamental injustice. But it exists within an area where it's highly appreciated as a beautiful national park and this kind of thing. Just this definition.
Beschützt vor wem? Vor den eigentlichen Besitzern. Dadurch, dass es zu einem Park gemacht wird.
Yeah. This is IUCN definition that is used of not protected area, which is used globally today by all governments and agencies, etc. Clearly defined geographical space, recognized, dedicated, and managed through legal or other effective means, I put in the red, to achieve long-term conservation of nature and ecosystem services. Now, the other effective means, why it's in red, that is where injustice is. That's where you have extrajudicial killings. That's where you have fencing of habitats. That's where you have displacement of communities. You can translate that?
Die Definition könnte ich jetzt auch gar nicht übersetzen, aber es geht eben im Wesentlichen darum, dass dort wirklich dramatisch eingegriffen wird in die Lebensvollzüge der lokalen Bevölkerung. Die werden ausgesperrt aus den Parks, die dürfen dort mit ihren Tieren nicht mehr rein, die werden teilweise auch getötet, von Parkrangern erschossen etc., also wirklich dramatische Verhältnisse.
Why do we love these national parks so much? Read history, it goes back to Theodore Roosevelt, who you have pictured here. He did this famous safari to Africa. It was actually in Kenya, 1910, 1911, where they went across. It was called a scientific expedition, but it was just a hunting trip, killing thousands of animals, over 5,000 animals. They use the word collected because when it's white people, you don't say killing. So the Smithsonian sponsored this and even celebrated the centenary back in 2011. If you think back to the history, this is when the idea of national parks started. And the fascination with Africa and Africa being a place of wildlife and all that, it grew from this Roosevelt's safari. This was I also discovered this was the period when the famous author Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote the book Tarzan. Tarzan's just a book, but Tarzan shows a white man in Africa communicating with animals, and there's no black people. That has stuck in our minds for over 100 years, and this still guides us, our thinking around conservation today. This is also from Roosevelt's safari. This is local people carrying his equipment hundreds of miles across Kenya. And these are indentured laborers. But it's put as a romantic thing. You go to Africa, you have black people serving you as you enjoy the landscape and wildlife. So this still advises or guides our thinking around tourism and conservation in Africa today, particularly in my country, Kenya.
Begonnen hat das Ganze 1910 mit einer Expedition von Theodore Roosevelt, also das war nicht der Mahatma Gandhi auf dem Bild, sondern der Theodore Roosevelt, der in einer wissenschaftlichen Expedition, er sagt einfach eine Tötungsexpedition, 5000 Tiere eingesammelt hat, weil töten hat man das nicht genannt. Und dann hat er kurz erwähnt, dass das mit dem Tarzan ja auch so eine komische Geschichte ist, ein weißer Mann, der in Afrika mit den Tieren spricht, irgendwie keine schwarzen Leute.
Okay, thank you. Now, if I go to the technical part of my scientific background, we should be protecting biodiversity, as in the species that live there. We should be protecting ecosystems, what they eat, where they live, and livelihoods of people who live there. we should not be protecting geographical areas, because geographical areas are just lines we drew on a map. They are meaningless. But still, up to today, you find people with, highly qualified people with PhDs, etc., trying to advance an idea that was created by someone who knew nothing about ecology. So this is a very strange situation. If you look back to the days of explorers in Africa, John Speke was one of the famous explorers credited with discovering all sorts of things. But this is a painting from the time. They were not walking hundreds of miles, they were being carried hundreds of miles. Fast forward to the present. This happens in Uganda today. This is tourism, where they go to see gorillas. People are still being carried, and work is supposed to, if you look at the philosophy, employment or work is supposed to give dignity, not just money. There's very little dignity in this. And you can even see the lady has very nice hiking boots and she's not going to walk. So tourism as practiced in Africa today is a very strange business that has throwbacks to things that are very primitive and lack intellectual standing.
Zwei Botschaften. Er sagt, Spezies, Menschen, Systeme sind zu schützen, nicht irgendwelche geografischen Grenzen. Und das andere war ein Bild aus 1862, wo der getragen wurde auf der Expedition. Und zum zweiten Bild, Today übersetzt sich im Deutschen in heute. Also es ist ein Bild, wie Tourismus aktuell funktioniert.
Yeah, if you go to the colonial angle, imperial colonialism, in a way, it was honest. England said Kenya is our colony, and various other countries said this is a colony. But today, colonialism hides, because the colonialists are not nations, but commercial entities, capitalists. The new colonies are not countries that are defined on the map, but sectors in the global south. And this is what I mean. The colonies are protected areas where you're doing so-called conservation. Renewable energy sector is another colony. Carbon offsets and carbon trading, export-based agriculture, natural resource rights, and media as well. And I'll illustrate this as I go ahead.
Das war die Umstellung. Früher gab es Kolonien, das waren Länder. Heute sind die Kolonien Sektoren.
What existed before the savior came? Because we always talk about saving environment, saving wildlife, etc. What existed, or what if the savior doesn't come? This is the question that we must ask ourselves, students and practitioners and scholars as well. It defines whether you're a conservationist or a colonialist. Because we have situations like this in Kenya. I just want to share a few pictures. This is near Masai Mara. There's some wild elands that just hangs out the shops. This is in Laikipia, near where I live. There's a giraffe that always comes up to check out luggage on the buses for some reason. That's me in Laikipia, another giraffe. So there's a lot of coexistence, or what Segi was referring to as convivial existence with wildlife. But this is not shown on National Geographic or Discovery Channel and all that, because the conservation concept that we have today is terrified of this. They don't want to show this.
Es gibt viel gelebten Konvivialismus. Das waren Beispiele aus dem praktischen Leben. Die Giraffe, eine zeigt ihn und die andere, die Bilder, ihr seht es eh. Und er sagt, das ist eben genau nicht gezeigt in National Geographic, also in so Reportagen und entsprechenden Magazinen, weil das die eigentlich eine Angst haben vor diesem Bild, weil das ja dann die ganze Debatte oder den ganzen also die ganze den Impetus sozusagen untergräbt, wenn das so wunderbar funktioniert, auch im Zusammenleben.
Yeah, if you look at the pictures I shared, that includes a village in Burkina Faso where crocodiles are their totem and they feed them and they hang out with them, the kids. There's hyenas in the streets in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. If you go around the streets late at night, you will meet hyenas. And these scenarios are common in many parts of Africa, but they don't want to show you that because the narrative, the colony narrative, is that African wildlife is in danger and the source of danger is black people. That is the narrative in the world today, all over. So conservation, it was interesting when Segi was speaking, he talked about conservation being this an invention. There's no indigenous African language that has a word for conservation because it's just life, the way we live. But they invented this, and when in the West, conservationists, you're left-wing, you're liberal, peaceful, green, inclusive, that kind of thing, friendly people. And people are proud to be conservationists here, and they mean well. But when you come to Africa, you're right-wing. You're conservative, you're exclusive, you're militarized. You wear a uniform, you're violent, you're intrusive, oppressive, and often racist. That's the reality we live with in Africa today from conservation organizations. Often the very same people who are peaceful and liberal when they're here or when they're in the Americas. So this is the duplicity we face in conservation. And to show that black people are sort of enemies of wildlife, you find communications or messaging like this. It says 1 African elephant is killed every 15 minutes. If you do the calculation, this is not possible. This works about 100,000 elephants per year. Elephants are huge animals. Kenya would be full of dead, rotting elephants if this was the case. But if you read the fine print down there, it says 1 elephant is killed every 15 minutes and none will be left in 2025. This is 2022. 2025, I think there'll be elephants left. So but these lies are okay when told. Conservation makes it okay to tell lies because it's for a good cause. That is the problem we face.
Das Narrativ, ich brauche ein gescheites Wort für Conservationism, Naturschutz, Umweltschutz, danke, manchmal. Danke, also das Narrativ ist, die Tiere in Afrika sind in Gefahr und sie sind in Gefahr durch die Afrikaner, die sie irgendwie umbringen, die Wilderer, die Jagd machen auf die Elefanten etc. Und er sagt, das ist eine Lüge, das geht sich nie aus von den Zahlen her. Er glaubt, es wird immer noch Elefanten geben, aber solche Lügen sind okay, wenn sie erzählt werden. Und die 2 Slides vorher mit den Birkenstocks und dem Armeestiefel hat er gesagt, und Leute, die in unserem, also im Norden, Umweltschützer sind, also die quasi auf ihre Wolle stehen, die sind eben links oder liberal und sobald es irgendwie runtergeht in den Süden, wechselt es auf die rechte Seite und wird eben autoritär und gewalttätig und bisweilen sogar die gleichen Leute.
Okay. Thank you. And this is from WWF website. Some time back they were moving they say they're saving black rhinos by moving them. So basically move them away from black people. That's what it means. And you can understand the origins of WWF, founded by Prince Bernhard of Netherlands and other hunters. So this was what they were doing, and they did this in Kenya, but I don't know why they were translocating rhinos, because we have very few rhinos in Kenya, so they could not be too many in a place, but the transfer was to get power away from KWS, which is the state agency, into WWF, because the new sanctuary for rhinos was being managed by WWF. Further north, also NGOs, there's a Lewa Wildlife Conservancy. They're also translocating rhinos. So rhinos is a very useful land grabbing tool. If you want land in Africa, find a rhino. You will put it there, you can get 5,000 acres, you can get a license to fence it, you can get a license to buy guns to guard it. So a rhino is a very useful tool. Find a rhino and you'll get land in Africa. That's the truth today.
Er sagt, finde ein Rhinoceros, wenn du irgendwie ein Stück Land haben willst in Afrika, dann finde ein Rhinoceros. Weil wenn du das hast, dann kannst du quasi eine Reserve rundherum bauen.
This is one of the areas where rhinos was transferred. This is in northern Kenya, a place called Sera. You see the green area is the Rhino Sanctuary and the black line is a fence. Now this is somebody's homeland, and people coming from here, they need to walk across to meet their friends or relatives here, but now they have to go around this way. And in here is the permanent water, good grass, and all those things that livestock needs. So this is the violence that goes on with conservation. We are fencing people away from their natural resources birthright. Yeah.
Der grüne Fleck ist ein für Rhinocerösser eingegrenztes Gebiet und der schwarze Strich drum ist ein Zaun. Und die Leute, die jetzt auf der einen Seite leben und ihre Bekannten oder zum Wasser wollen mit den Tieren auf der anderen Seite, die müssen jetzt außen rum.
Thank you. And what's the root of this? The root of this is the flawed thought process that grew conservation out of the term conservation, out of exploration and exploitation by colonialists. So it's an artificial term, but we are still trying to make it normal, make it acceptable, make it an area of expertise. And it produces what I call microcolonialism. These are colonies that are small, that are not countries, some are sectors and industry, etc. And I was thinking microcolonialism in conservation today, it requires violence. That's why Nature Conservation Officer in Austria does not carry a gun, but the one in Kenya carries a gun. Because microcolonialism conservation requires violence. And now we have NGOs or civil society organizations that have armed law enforcement or rangers under the command of a foreigner who you can see driving the car there. So this is a big philosophical and ethical problem in conservation, not just in Kenya, but all over Africa.
Der Umweltschutz ist aus dem Kolonialismus herausgeboren und hat Mikrokolonialismus eigentlich kreiert. Der wiederum braucht Gewalt, weswegen die Umweltschützer in Afrika auch Gewehre haben, anders als bei uns.
And you see these rangers, they're outside the system, national system of police or law enforcement, so they're indisciplined and they end up murdering people. And you can see this from one of the daily newspapers. There's a probe for some people being murdered for having entered the area where rhinos were. Also on fencing, this is a map showing Mount Kenya. The town where I live is somewhere there. But the maps show there's an NGO fencing Mount Kenya, all around the Mount Kenya forest. And this is a World Heritage Site. It's sacred sites for many indigenous groups. It's source of dry season grazing, medicinal plants, and all sorts of things for local communities. And now they're fencing it. And the pretext is conservation. They say they're fencing it to keep elephants from going to community areas. But on the ground, this is what the fence looks like. Now, if you look at that fence, even a rabbit or a rat cannot go through that fence. This is not for elephants. This is a fence to keep people out.
Sie zäunen den Mount Kenya ein, deren Gebiet ist, das auf vielen Dimensionen sehr bedeutsam ist für die Leute, wo es darum geht, der hat sozusagen religiöse, spirituelle Bedeutung, der hat Bedeutung jetzt auch als Grazing, also als Nahrungsgebiet. Und die Überschrift, warum es eingegrenzt ist, damit die Elefanten nicht die lokalen Communities bedrohen. Aber der Zaun ist quasi kein Elefantenzaun, sondern kommt dann einmal mit einer Maus durch. Und sicherlich nicht Leute. Und um das geht's.
Microcolonialism in conservation practice, it requires dishonesty. You must lie because the truth doesn't sort of lie. So you have wealthy foreigners coming to own their little piece of Africa. Remember what I said about Tarzan? This is Tarzan right now. This gentleman's called Joachim. He's German. There's Hans-Jörg Wyss, he's Swiss, again bringing their billions of dollars. Joachim said his ambition is to have 2 million acres of protected areas in Africa. Nobody asks him where the people are going to go. Hans-Jörg Wyss, again, the 30 by 30% recommendation he wants to finance. He's given like $1 billion. There's Richard Branson, who has also given some millions of dollars for this in Kenya. And it goes on and on.
Viele, also deutsche, internationale Investoren, der letzte oder Branson, kaufen sich ihre Lodge oder versuchen halt irgendwie geschützte Gebiete dort quasi für sich zu reklamieren und treiben die Leute raus.
And strangely, they are all men. I think the women seem to be a bit wiser. They don't get involved in this. But this is what happens. Local people get pushed out to create these spaces, these pieces of Africa. And that is a big problem. Another thing, carbon offsets was spoken about earlier on. Again, equating emissions from flights, etc., to emissions from someone cooking with a fire in Africa. There's no comparison. But carbon offset sort of makes us equal in carbon footprint, and that's fundamentally untrue. And it puts responsibility on people in Africa to make sacrifices for consumption in the global north, or people in the global south to make sacrifices for consumption in the global north. And this carbon offsetting, carbon trade, etc., is fundamentally money laundering, because it's money that moves around, free capital flow without goods or services flowing along with that money. Maybe.
Carbon Offsets, also er beschreibt das quasi ein Flug zwischen London und Paris, das übersetzt sich in quasi 3 bis 10 Pfund Beitrag zu irgendwie einem Stove, hat er glaube ich gehabt vor Ort. Und es ist eigentlich eine Geldwäschemaschine, weil es freies Geld produziert, das herumfliegt.
Yeah, and fundamentally, my point is, if you do environmental damage in Europe, you need to repair it in Europe. You can't damage environment in Austria and go plant trees in Kenya. It doesn't work like that. But
also Reparieren der Beschädigungen hier, man kann nicht in Kenia Bäume pflanzen und damit die Schäden in Österreich.
But the whole world has accepted this nonsense as truth, which is very strange. So again, it requires kings, and this is Edward Wilson, the sort of discoverer, if you will, of island biogeography, a very famous ecologist at Harvard. Jane Goodall, chimpanzee conservation in Tanzania, doing it for many years. Diane Fossey the late was conserving gorillas in Rwanda. Daphne Sheldrick, the elephant conservation in Kenya. Ian Douglas Hamilton, elephant conservation in Kenya. They're all white. And they're all conservation heroes from Africa. I'm not sure if any of you knows a black conservation hero from Africa. And that's what media does. It deletes African people from the conservation story here.
So,
Ken Saro-Wiwa was against the oil industry in
So you just proved him wrong. You know one. Who in the audience knows? Well, there's 10 people.
And I agree. His work was in part of the oil industry. Not necessarily wildlife, but in the oil industry. But he was very prominent in Nigeria. Please.
But the point he made, Verzeihung, der Punkt, den er gemacht hat, war, alle Figuren waren weiße Umweltschützer, Umweltschützerinnen. Kennt ihr irgendeinen Schwarzen? Und jetzt vielleicht, darauf hat die Kollegin gesagt, es gibt einen, Ölcompany, und ein Zitat von ganz vorher hat gesagt, Umweltschutz ist ein Wort, das gab es in keiner afrikanischen Sprache. Wir haben schlicht und einfach quasi in Harmonie mit der Umwelt gelebt, Punkt, da musste man kein Wort dafür erfinden.
Thank you. And probably most egregious of this is the Duke of Cambridge. He constantly harps on about wildlife conservation, while on the other hand supporting sport hunting. And in a way, monarchies are parasites on the world today. Because this is only accepted because of who he is, which does not hold any merit. And the thing is, he's always talking also about population, only of Africa. He never talks about population of UK or India or China or anywhere. It's only of Africa. And the population is diverting attention from the environmental crisis, which is from consumption patterns, carbon footprint. carbon footprint is the most important thing in terms of global environment. But this is what makes it, normalizes it. People being royal or being regarded for who he is rather than what he says. And the media takes this up. This violence in communication, I'm sorry this is in English, but I hope it's translatable into German, because in the green you see game meat or venison is when wild animal meat is eaten by white people. If it's eaten by black people, they call it bush meat. When wild animals are killed in Africa by white people, they call it hunting. When it's black people, they call it poaching. They're exploring and encroaching. There's ranchers, white people who own cattle, and herders, black people who own cattle. There's travelers or tourists who are white people, and there's nomads who are black people. There's people, white people, people with names and identities and aspirations. Black people are called communities. The term community eliminates the individual, and there lies a serious philosophical problem, because Mordecai doesn't count. It's Mordecai's community. Mordecai has his own opinions, and this is a serious problem in language. It's there in literature, in media, and academia as well.
Ich werde jetzt, auch weil ich es so präzise gar nicht könnte, nicht jeden einzelnen Begriff übersetzen, aber auch aus Zeitgründen. Es geht im Wesentlichen darum, wenn etwas... Could you go back?
Yeah.
Die Grünen sind, wenn Weiße das tun, und das sind immer positiv konnotierte Begriffe. Und die roten Begriffe sind die Begriffe, die gebraucht werden, wenn Schwarze etwas tun, und das sind immer Begriffe mit einer negativen Konnotation. Und das ist systemische Gewalt in der Kommunikation. Ja. Also, ja, wurscht. Ich glaube es.
Yeah, so you see a photograph like this is a Maasai guy with his cattle and there's some zebras there. They call it habitat encroachment, which is a bad thing. But when it's white people riding horses, they say it's riding safari. Good thing. So this is very typical. WWF has this problem also with their messaging. They say like this, Kenyans protecting their wildlife. You see that picture there. That picture is not a person protecting wildlife. It's a person sleeping in a stable with a wild animal when he should be home with his family. That guy should be at home with his kids or his family instead of in a stable with the rhino. That rhino is not in danger, it's in a stable. And this whole narrative is owned by conservationists, because we don't do this. In Africa, we don't cuddle wildlife. We respect wildlife. We don't want to pet it and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Er sagt, das Problem ist, also dieses ganze Narrativ ist so völlig verquer und verdreht. Das Bild vorher war übertitelt mit dem Afrikaner beschützen ihre wilden Tiere. Und er hat gesagt, völlig absurd, ja, wir beschützen die nicht, wir respektieren sie, und der Typ sollte nicht mit dem Rhino da irgendwie im Stall schlafen, sondern zu Hause bei seiner Familie.
So how can we escape the injustice of conservation? And conservation, I put two question marks there, because conservation, I say, doesn't exist even in our local languages. It's an invention of destructive societies. So we cannot start, that's why we have all these problems trying to force it into places where it didn't, into people who didn't need to invent it. And colonialism. So academia must develop new standards and definition. Maybe we should replace the word conservation with something, if the linguists can do that. We need to entrench indigenous livelihoods and aspirations in the conservation discourse. We have to partner with the humanities, meetings like this, where we talk philosophers, sociologists, historians, anthropology, and politics, and religion even. Tourism should be kicked off from conservation discussion. Tourism is meant to be a byproduct of conservation, not the purpose for conservation. And human population is an important thing, but it should be discussed by Ministry of Health, Education, Human Services, not conservation. You cannot bring human population discourse into the conservation table, because that's sort of dehumanizing people into parts of ecosystem discussion.
You need to leave me the slide.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Otherwise you test me
Yeah.
too much. So, also die Wissenschaft muss neue Standards entwickeln. Die Perspektive von indigenen Bevölkerungen gehört in den Diskurs, gehört in die Diskussion hinein. Es braucht andere Disziplinen, nämlich Soziologie, Geschichte, Anthropologie und auch Politikwissenschaft. Tourismus sollte aus dem Umweltschutzdiskurs überhaupt verbannt werden. Also dieses Ecotourism ist quasi das Schlimmste von allen. Und Human Population, also diese entpersonifizierte, quasi abstrakte Größe, sollte auch aus dem Diskurs ausgeschlossen werden, weil es um konkrete Lebensvollzüge und Individuen geht, die da jeweils vorkommen.
Thank you. And academia in conservation, academia tends to follow injustice instead of trying to guide justice. And this is an example. How do papers like this get published? It says European colonizers killed so many indigenous Americans that the planet cooled down. So that genocide was good. That's what this guy is saying. How do journals still publish this? This is a study which was done, it was published in Nature. It said the world has 422 trees for every person. But if you look at the graph, the only African country is Ethiopia there with 143. But you look at number 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are all settler colonies. Canada is a settler colony, Greenland, Australia, and the United States. How come the Peru or Brazil is not here? Or Democratic Republic of Congo? They'd be number 1. But you don't want to show non-white people as good environmentalists. That's the purpose of such graphics. So the only African country is the one with a lot of desert areas and high human population. So that is what they do with graphics like this. So even communication and media is getting into this messaging, which is very harmful.
Wissenschaft sagt ja, folgt der Ausbeutung und der Ungleichheit, aber behindert sie nicht und leitet sozusagen nicht den Diskurs und die Politik an. Und er bringt 2 Beispiele. Das eine ist, auf der Vorderseite hat er gesagt, na, eigentlich war die Entdeckung Amerikas im Sinne des Diskurses, den wir hier haben, gut, weil die haben so viele Leute umgebracht, hat man herausgefunden, dass das Global Warming reduziert wurde. Also insofern könnte man irgendwie sagen, Putin is doing us a favor? Oder, das hat er jetzt nicht gesagt, das war jetzt nur eine blöde, unqualifizierte Assoziation von mir. Genau, das andere ist diese Grafik hier, die irgendwie zeigt, da kommt außer Äthiopien kommt überhaupt kein Land des globalen Südens vor, die eigentlich vorkommen müssten. Also irgendwie Democratic Republic of Congo oder Brasilien müssten da einfach drauf sein, sind es aber nicht. Und das zeigt irgendwie im Diskurs, dass quasi nur weiße und Settler-Communities irgendwie die gute Seite der Welt sind.
Thank you. Again, publications that now start pointing fingers at cows as being major producers of emissions. Ignoring SUVs or nuclear power stations and cows become the problem. Previous one was Africa, this is India. India also has the similar problems, and this is a poster by Wildlife Trust of India. It was telling them to stop encroaching on forests. But one thing you notice, look at the skin complexion of the guards and the guys being thrown out. So it's very subtle, but it's everywhere in conservation communication. Conservation has sort of normalized racism, and this is very harmful because it's becoming acceptable and people don't notice it, and it's the seed of injustice. Yeah.
Was an dem Bild, das ist ein indisches Bild, und er sagt, Naturschutzkommunikation hat Rassismus normalisiert. Wenn Sie sich die Hautfarbe der Wächter und derer, die da irgendwie rauskaut werden aus dieser Reserve anschauen, dann ist das eine subtile Form des Rassismus und das hat das quasi normalisiert und das ist eine Botschaft, wir kriegen es gar nicht mehr mit.
Again, this is a poster talking about the Nature Conservancy pushing birth control programs in East Africa. And that one, and we've gone through that. Application of technology in environmental conservation, it requires intellect and humanity. And Tony mentioned this a bit earlier. If you look at wind farms, we create wind farms, but we always push people out. This is in northern Kenya. 150,000 acres was fenced off from people for this wind farm. So what sort of renewable energies makes injustice okay? And we need to address that question, because we cannot accept that. Again, electric cars, the Tesla cars, etc., but nobody talks much about the kids who are abused and are working in the coltan mines in Congo to supply this endless need for coltan for these creation of batteries. And we have to address these issues. The environment cannot be more important than any human being. We are conserving it for human beings. So if we kill human beings to conserve it, then what we are doing is pretty useless. Maybe you can...
Diese zwei Beispiele waren einfach, um zu zeigen, dass der Umweltschutz höher gerankt wird als das Leben von Menschen. Diese Windfarms, die aufgestellt werden und einfach lokale Population vertreiben, oder auch der Tesla, dessen elektrische Batterien irgendwie quasi CO2 einsparen, aber niemand redet darüber, über den Jungen, der in Uganda in einer...
Kongo.
Im Kongo,
ja.
Dankeschön, im Kongo aus einer Mine die Inhaltsstoffe für die Batterie, die seltenen Erden etc. rausholt. Oder Kobalt.
State capture. The Nature Conservancy is a very notorious organization. It's one which you should treat with a lot of caution, I'd say. This is just an example. They annexed basically the Seychelles. 15 million loan from Nature Conservancy and 5 million of grants. They purchased 20 million of Seychelles sovereign debt held by European nations. And for that, they leased 210,000 square kilometers around the Seychelles as marine protected areas, limiting the use by local people and limiting the use to research and regulated tourism, and prohibiting oil and gas exploration. The oil and gas exploration still goes on, but instead of talking to Seychelles government, you talk to the Nature Conservancy. But if you do calculation, 20 million for 210,000 square kilometers is about $7.3 per square kilometer per year. Even I can get about 50 square kilometers for myself at that price. And this is not conservation. This is colonialism. This is ruthless exploitation of nations. And small island nations are very vulnerable to this.
So ein internationaler Naturschutzfonds hat die Schulden der Seychellen gekauft und hat gedealt mit den Seychellen, dass die dafür 210 Quadratkilometer von Meer reservieren, also als Reservat definieren, in dem eben Nutzung durch die lokale Bevölkerung eingeschränkt ist und auch die Öl- und Gasförderung. Und er sagt aber Öl- und Gasförderung geht immer noch weiter, aber man muss sich jetzt statt mit der Regierung, muss man jetzt mit diesem Naturschutzfonds sich abstimmen. Und wenn er das umrechnet, ist das eigentlich ziemlich günstig. Er selber könnte auch ein paar Quadratkilometer mieten, weil es sind nur $7 Miete pro Jahr pro Quadratkilometer. Das geht sich aus. Er baut sich jetzt ein Haus auf den Seychellen.
Okay.
Oder ein Hausboot. Ja.
So what about local livelihoods? In an island nation, you see, if someone else controls the seascape, that means they need the seascape for fishing, for transportation, movement, etc., and recreation, all that. But this was the quote that, you succeed when all the stakeholders are a bit unhappy. This was the Nature Conservancy Director of Finance after being interviewed in the Financial Times about this deal. So conservation has become an exploitative business. Just to give you an example from Kenya, we have Nairobi Water Fund, where the Nature Conservancy again has got leaseholds in the watersheds, and they're getting money from Coca-Cola and Diageo. Diageo is an alcoholic drinks company, amongst other corporates. And they're building a fund, they get the money for that, and they use it to make tunnels, and they divert the rivers, and basically privatize the Nairobi water supply. And this is going on currently. And if you come now to COP26, which was held in Glasgow, you find that the state capture is shown very clearly. This is our president went to visit Diageo, Johnny Walker factory in Glasgow during COP26. And obviously they were signing deals to privatize our water. If you look at this picture, our president was signing an agreement to join something called Giants Club. It's run by an NGO called Space for Giants. The gentleman there is called Yevgeny Lebedev. He's a Russian oligarch, owns the Independent newspaper and a number of other things in the UK. The gentleman there is Max Graham, CEO of some organization called Space for Giants that say they do elephant conservation. And that was the then Minister for Wildlife in Kenya. So they signed this agreement, but this agreement actually gives corporates access to forests in Kenya, and they're doing this in Gabon, they're doing it in Botswana as well. And again, COP26, there's Yevgeny Lebedev, and there is our president sitting in his meeting. That's our Minister for Environment, Minister for Tourism, Foreign Affairs Minister. So he has captured the Kenya cabinet, and any instruction he gives here will be implemented, and there's nothing we can do. So this is a very dangerous thing. Countries with natural resources are very vulnerable to state capture, and the people lose access to their natural resources because of this. So those people are all there to take instructions from the corporate world.
Vorher noch gesagt, also genau der Präsident, da gab es ein paar Fotos, der unterzeichnet ein Abkommen, mit dem er die Wasserversorgung von Nairobi privatisiert an den TNC. Der Gelder, also wieder diesen internationalen Fonds, der Gelder von Coca-Cola und anderen Industrieunternehmen dafür auch kriegt. Man kennt ja die Zusammenhänge, dann wird das Wasser irgendwie schwieriger, dann muss man irgendwie dort wieder Wasser verkaufen. Und dort gibt es aus dem COP26 und auch das Bild vorher, zeigt einfach die enge Verflechtung von Regierungsmitgliedern inklusive Präsident, die da quasi enge Beziehungen unterhalten zu Unternehmensführern, die ihnen mehr oder minder diktieren, was sie zu tun haben. Oder jedenfalls Einfluss nehmen.
But recently things have started changing. This report from Auckland Institute recently came out detailing a lot of human rights violations in Kenya. A few years ago, myself and my co-author John Mbaria authored this book, The Big Conservation Lie. We talk about these policy problems. It's available on Amazon, other outlets if you're interested in buying it. So the discussion is changing now, but it's been very harmful. It's been very difficult for at least 120, 130 years. And it's time for us now to rethink the way we look at conservation and ask the same questions. We are claiming to want biodiversity, but we cannot accept human diversity. We must accept all diversity, human diversity, livelihood diversity, political diversity, along with biodiversity. Biodiversity alone is useless to us as people. Thank you very much.